decades, America and Canada were inseparable, trading steel, aluminum, and vehicle parts like clockwork. But in a single bold move, that harmony shattered. Canada didn't just respond to new American tariffs, it struck back with surgical precision, targeting the weakest links in America's automotive supply chain right when they could break the hardest. This isn't your typical trade dispute. This is economic warfare. Time to perfection. Prices are spiking. Electric vehicle production is choking. Factory layoffs are looming. And one company, Tesla, is right in the crosshairs. So how did this all spiral out of control? Why did Canada take aim at its biggest trading partner? And what does this mean for your next car, your monthly expenses, and the future of the entire electric vehicle market? Let's break it down. Why this wasn't just another tariff fight. Trade wars often play out like slow-motion chess matches. Governments impose sweeping tariffs. The other side responds in kind, and eventually both sides back off, having made their point. But this time was different. Canada's retaliation didn't feel like a tit-for-tat. It felt like a surgical strike. Instead of blanketing American industries with tariffs, Canadian officials targeted where it would hurt the most: politically sensitive regions. They imposed levies on products manufactured in key states that not only play a vital role in vehicle production, but also in deciding elections. It was a brutal form of economic pressure with clear political intent. And it worked. Factories in the Midwest that relied on Canadian aluminum suddenly saw their profit margins evaporate. Suppliers in the South, heavily dependent on cross-border logistics, were left scrambling for alternatives. And lawmakers representing those regions began to feel the heat. Calls poured in from local businesses. Union leaders issued warnings. Constituents, already facing inflation on essentials, now stared down the barrel of soaring vehicle prices. Canada's playbook avoided collateral damage and aimed straight at the American core by focusing on vehicle components and raw materials, especially those feeding electric vehicle growth. They didn't just disrupt an industry, they upended the country's green transition strategy. But if Canada's moves were sharp, the consequences were even sharper for one company in particular, one whose success depended on the very resources now being restricted. Tesla in the crosshairs. For a company built on speed, scale, and efficiency, any disruption in its materials pipeline spells disaster. Have you heard about something called vertical integration? It's the secret recipe Tesla uses to stay ahead of everyone. By controlling its own factories and suppliers, it was supposed to be shielded from the shocks that plagued traditional automakers. But even the most advanced models crumble when the foundational inputs are blocked. Canada didn't just raise prices, they effectively restricted access to the very metals that power electric vehicle batteries. And the timing could not have been worse. Tesla had been aggressively scaling up production, rolling out new models, and investing heavily in battery technology. The company was counting on smooth resource flows from Canada, where many of these materials are mined and refined. Now, those flows were uncertain. Delays mounted, costs soared, investors panicked. While older automakers like Ford and General Motors could pivot more easily thanks to diversified suppliers, Tesla's entire model was built for streamlined operations. A single weak link, and the entire machine falters. That is exactly what happened. Assembly lines slowed, launches were postponed, and the electric vehicle brand that once symbolized the future suddenly looked vulnerable. But the damage didn't end at the factory floor. It was already filtering into dealerships, showrooms, and family budget. And now it's you, the buyer, who is feeling it. Your next car just got way more expensive. Prices have been rising for years. But what we are seeing now goes beyond normal market inflation. This is a structural shift driven by geopolitics, scarcity, and fear. And if you're thinking of buying a new or used car, the consequences are already visible on every sticker. The cost of raw materials has spiked. That means higher manufacturing expenses across the board, from steel frames to electronic components. Manufacturers, unable to absorb the increases, are passing the burden to you. Entry-level vehicles that once sold for $25,000 are now approaching $35,000 or $40,000. In some cases, even more. And it's not just new cars. As buyers get priced out of new inventory, they turn to the used market, creating a surge in demand. But supply hasn't caught up. This imbalance is driving up prices on older models, sometimes to levels higher than newer counterparts just a year ago. Financing is getting trickier too. As risk increases, lenders are tightening their criteria. Interest rates are climbing, down payments are rising, monthly terms are stretching out longer than ever before. For the average family, buying a car is no longer a simple decision. It's becoming a financial gamble. Dealers are also under stress. With limited stock and unpredictable timelines, they're having to field more frustrated customers while juggling shrinking margins. And for people who rely on cars for work or commuting, the stakes are even higher. This isn't just a blip. If the trade war continues, pricing could be permanently altered. Consumers will need to adjust expectations, not just on what kind of car they can afford, but whether they can afford one at all. And all of this started with one move, one retaliation, one shift in a fragile, once stable relationship. But what comes next is even more explosive. The hidden collapse of American factories. Most people picture massive car plants when they think of the auto industry. Behind every gleaming vehicle are hundreds of small suppliers. Local machine shops, tool makers, fabricators, and logistics firms that quietly keep the entire operation moving. And now that web is unraveling. When the Canadian government launched its precision retaliation against United States tariffs, it knew exactly where to hit: steel, aluminum, and crucial car components. These were not random choices. They were targeted strikes at the base of the automotive pyramid, the parts of the supply chain that lacked the margins or resources to absorb sudden cost spikes. Suddenly, a gasket supplier in Ohio can no longer afford to import Canadian aluminum. A brake manufacturer in Indiana has lost access to nickel that once flowed smoothly across the border. A wiring harness company in Michigan sees its orders disappear overnight as automakers slow production. These are not headlines. They are quiet shutdowns happening in real time. Small businesses that were already struggling with razor-thin margins now face the impossible choice: raise prices and lose contracts, or eat the cost and bleed out. Bankruptcy filings are rising, layoffs are spreading, and entire towns built around these specialized trades are watching their economic foundations collapse. What is most devastating is how invisible this is. Unlike a major factory closure with news cameras and press conferences, these shutdowns happen one by one, quietly. The machines stop humming, the parking lots go empty, and suddenly another thread in the American industrial fabric is gone, forever. The crisis deepens further when you realize this domino effect is only beginning. Because while these small suppliers fall, the industry they support is facing a storm of its own. The electric vehicle dream crumbling beneath our feet. The electric vehicle revolution was supposed to be America's future. Cleaner, smarter, more efficient transportation. Entire states poured billions into retooling for this next chapter, building gigafactories, retraining workers, subsidizing consumer adoption. But now that dream is on the verge of collapse. Why? Because every electric vehicle depends on materials that are suddenly at risk. Nickel, lithium, aluminum. These are not abstract minerals. They are the lifeblood of electric vehicle batteries, drivetrains, and chassis. And a significant portion of them came from Canada. With new tariffs in place and trade channels blocked, electric vehicle manufacturers are facing a resource crisis. Tesla, the poster child for the electric revolution, is already buckling. It has lost not only raw material access, but also key incentives in Canada, along with market presence. A 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles has priced them out of the country completely. The impact was swift: order cancellations, investor panic, production slowdowns. But Tesla is just the beginning. Ford, General Motors, Rivian, they all depend on North American integration to remain competitive. Without access to Canadian resources, their electric vehicle roadmaps fall apart. New models are delayed. Costs skyrocket, and confidence evaporates. This could not come at a worse time. Electric vehicles were just beginning to gain momentum in the consumer market. Now, with rising prices and production delays, that momentum is being crushed. Even die-hard supporters are hesitating, and automakers are pulling back from bold bets they made only months ago. What was supposed to be America's biggest transition in transportation since the invention of the assembly line is now in freefall. And it is not just because of tariffs, it is because the underlying structure of this dream was always more fragile than we wanted to admit. As electric vehicle momentum collapses, another system is breaking apart in ways the public is only beginning to feel. Supply chains snapped in half. The United States and Canada have spent decades building a deeply integrated automotive supply chain. The border was not a barrier, it was a corridor. Parts, materials, and finished components flowed back and forth in a dance of shared efficiency. That system is now broken. New tariffs have introduced unpredictable delays and mounting costs. Companies that once relied on just-in-time logistics are now dealing with customs bottlenecks, sudden price hikes, and uncertain delivery times. For industries where one delayed part can stall an entire production line, this is catastrophic. It is not just automakers who are affected. This trade disruption hits every adjacent sector: machinery manufacturers, commercial truck producers, heavy equipment firms, aerospace contractors. All of them rely on the same cross-border integration that is now crumbling. Worse still, the ripple effects are stretching across the globe. European firms that rely on North American auto parts are already revising their contracts. Japanese and South Korean manufacturers are exploring new partnerships elsewhere, and countries like China are stepping into the void, securing deals that could make their supply chains more attractive than ever. This is not just a North American story, it is a global reordering. And for the average consumer, the consequences are already starting to show up in the worst way possible. Consumers under siege. You may not run a factory, you may not build cars, but make no mistake, this trade war is coming for your wallet. Start with car loan. As production slows and prices rise, lenders are getting nervous. Higher risk means tighter requirements. That means larger down payments, higher interest rates, and stricter credit checks. Getting approved for a vehicle is suddenly harder and more expensive than ever before. Now layer on insurance. Replacement costs are rising as parts become harder to source and labor becomes scarcer. That leads to increased premiums, higher deductibles, and longer repair wait time. Even a minor fender bender could become a costly nightmare. And it does not stop there. Energy bills are under pressure too. Canada supplies not just materials, but electricity to several northern states. If those flows are disrupted or taxed, households could face soaring utility costs. Businesses that rely on steady power, like grocery stores, warehouses, or hospitals, may be forced to raise prices just to stay afloat. Add all of this together, and what you get is inflation on a personal level. Not just rising car prices, but everything tied to them. Groceries transported by trucks, deliveries delayed by logistics chaos, small businesses struggling to afford equipment. It all leads back to you paying more for less. This is no longer a distant policy fight between two governments. It is your paycheck, your grocery bill, your ability to replace a car or heat your home. And while governments debate and retaliate, this daily pressure on households only grows heavier. But the scariest part, we are still early in the storm, because while consumers are bracing for impact, geopolitical forces are already preparing the next shockwave. Canada's last resort. Could energy be next? Canada is one of the United States of America's largest external suppliers of crude oil, natural gas, and hydroelectric power. Entire regions, particularly in the northern states, rely on Canadian electricity to keep the lights on and factories running. Cutting or taxing that flow would send shockwaves through the economy. Fuel costs would surge for transportation companies, truck fleets, and airlines. Every delivery, every shipment, every commute would cost more, and those increases would not stay in the transportation sector. They would spill into supermarket shelves, utilities, construction projects, nearly every part of American life. But energy is not just about economics. It is about control. By withholding or taxing oil and electricity, Canada could shift the power dynamic in ways that tariffs never could. It would not just pressure American companies. It would corner the federal government itself. Voters do not tolerate blackouts or fuel shortages. If power plants in New York, Michigan, or Minnesota go dark, Washington would be forced to respond quickly and decisively. So far, Canadian leadership has held off on this move. Perhaps they know that energy retaliation crosses a line. But the mere fact that this option remains on the table gives Canada enormous leverage. And the United States of America knows it. Because once energy is weaponized, there is no going back. And as North America tears itself apart, another global superpower is watching, and moving fast. China's strategic play. While Canada and the United States of America spiral into economic conflict, China is laying the groundwork for a silent victory. It is not building tanks or flexing missiles. It is locking in the raw materials and industrial partnerships needed to dominate the future of electric vehicles. And with it, global automotive power. For years, China has methodically invested in lithium mines, cobalt sources, and nickel contracts across the world. Now, with North American trade fracturing, those investments are paying off. Chinese companies are striking new deals with Canadian mining firms. While American automakers worry about tariff spikes and political retaliation, China is busy guaranteeing its long-term supply of the same metals Tesla, Ford, and General Motors desperately need. This is not just about sourcing parts, it is about controlling the future. Electric vehicle batteries are the heart of the new transportation economy. Whoever controls those batteries controls the market, and China is ensuring that control flows through its supply chains. At the same time, Chinese automakers like BYD are scaling up production at breakneck speed, offering models that are cheaper, smarter, and more appealing to global consumers. In many markets, they are already outselling Tesla. The irony is hard to miss. As the United States of America tries to protect its manufacturing base with tariffs, it may be handing global dominance to its biggest rival. China does not need to win a trade war. It just needs to stay out of the fight while North America cannibalizes itself. And as European and Asian partners look for stability, many are now turning to China as a reliable alternative. That shift is already underway. Europe's panic and Asia's opportunity. Most Americans think this is a domestic trade dispute, but in boardrooms across Berlin, Tokyo, and Seoul, the mood is anything but calm. The transatlantic and trans-Pacific supply chains that feed global auto production are being destabilized in real time, and the ripple effects are stretching far beyond North America. In Europe, manufacturers are bracing for shortages. German and French automakers rely on North American parts to finish vehicles assembled on their home turf. If shipments slow or prices spike, European production lines could halt. That is why teams are already being dispatched to South America, Southeast Asia, and Africa to scout for replacement suppliers and new trade routes. Some manufacturers are even fast-tracking old contingency plans from the pandemic era, dusting off blueprints for regional hubs that were once shelved due to cost. Meanwhile, Asian countries see opportunity in the chaos. South Korea, Japan, and Vietnam are stepping up efforts to become the new go-to hubs for batteries and electronics. Flexible trade deals, lower labor costs, and political neutrality make them attractive to Western automakers desperate for alternatives. Some governments are even offering tech-sharing agreements and expedited permitting to lure foreign investment. And then there are the emerging players. Nations like Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand are aggressively marketing themselves as the next big thing in automotive manufacturing. With incentives, land grants, and access to untapped resources, they are building the factories that might replace North America's role in global car production. Even smaller economies like Laos and Cambodia are signaling readiness to enter the race, offering streamlined regulations and digital infrastructure zones to attract industry giants. This is more than just a trade shuffle. It is a reordering of global influence. Countries that were once peripheral to the automotive world are now in the spotlight, and nations that once dominated are now on the defensive. But while Asia seizes opportunity and Europe scrambles for stability, politicians in North America are facing a reckoning of their own. Political fallout in Washington and Ottawa. No one expected this trade war to hit so hard, so fast, and now both sides are paying the price politically. In Washington, lawmakers who once rallied behind tough tariffs are facing backlash from constituents whose jobs are disappearing and whose vehicle prices are soaring. Town halls are boiling over with anger, and the White House, already under pressure, is seeing its approval numbers wobble in key manufacturing states. President Donald Trump's trade strategy was built on the idea of strength through pressure. But as factory closures mount and unions revolt, even some of his allies are questioning the wisdom of this approach. Meanwhile, Canada's former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is navigating a different storm. His retaliation earned praise from some voters, but not all. In regions dependent on American trade, businesses are hurting, and the support is fading. This battle is not just about aluminum and auto parts anymore. It is about political survival. News outlets are flooded with footage of shuttered plants and laid-off workers. Candidates on both sides of the border are rewriting their campaign strategies. Some double down on nationalism. Others plead for compromise. The electoral consequences could be profound. If the tariffs hold, the next round of elections may turn on who voters blame for economic hardship. And if energy retaliation or deeper supply chain shocks occur, the stakes will climb even higher. Political careers may rise or fall on this crisis, and the longer it drags on, the harder it becomes to undo. But even as Washington and Ottawa clash, the rest of the world is moving on. China is rising. Asia is realigning, Europe is adapting, and the longer North America stays locked in this fight, the more power it surrenders on the global stage. The long decline of American manufacturing. What we are witnessing right now in the auto industry is not just a reaction to new tariffs. It is the collapse of a system that has been rotting from within for decades. This trade war did not cause the crisis. It revealed it. For more than 40 years, American manufacturing has quietly been bleeding out. Offshoring drained the life from countless communities. Automation erased jobs faster than anyone could retrain for them. And worst of all, both corporations and politicians let it happen while promising the opposite. Factories that once powered cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and St. Louis now stand hollowed out, their shells rusting under the weight of broken promises. Entire towns were built around these plants, towns where a single employer provided income, identity, and stability. And when those employers left for cheaper labor abroad, they did not just take jobs, they took futures. What remained was a workforce scrambling to adapt, a generation of young people fleeing for opportunity elsewhere, and a government unwilling to invest in long-term solutions. This was not just a failure of economics, it was a failure of vision. While other nations, especially in Asia and Europe, modernized their plants, strengthened vocational training, and built strategic industrial policies, the United States of America bet on deregulation and short-term profits. The result? A once dominant manufacturing power now struggles to produce the very parts it once exported worldwide. Even before the tariffs, the cracks were everywhere. Delayed shipments, aging infrastructure, a shortage of skilled workers. This trade war simply exposed how brittle the system had become, and the timing could not be worse. As the world shifts to electric vehicles, the American auto industry needs agility, innovation, and resilience more than ever. But how do you build the future on a foundation that is already crumbling? You don't, not without a complete overhaul. And that brings us to a company that once symbolized that future, Tesla. Now even it is starting to buckle under the weight of this new reality. Can Tesla survive this? We have already talked about how Elon Musk built a system where Tesla controlled every major piece of the supply chain, from batteries to software. It made production more efficient, margins stronger, and innovation faster. But when tariffs hit key materials like aluminum, nickel, and lithium, all of which Tesla sources heavily from Canada and beyond, the impact is immediate and brutal. Unlike other automakers with more diversified sourcing, Tesla's tight control leaves it with few fallback options. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because then there is the backlash. Tesla is no longer the darling of progressive, tech-savvy consumers. A growing number of buyers are actively avoiding the brand, not because of the cars, but because of the company's leadership. Elon Musk's polarizing public image has triggered boycotts, social media firestorms, and even physical attacks on Tesla vehicles in some regions. Across Europe and parts of North America, dealerships are reporting slowed sales and increased cancellations. The brand, once seen as the future of mobility, is now a lightning rod for controversy. Investors are noticing. Major funds are pulling back, shares are slipping, and internal pressure is mounting. Layoffs have hit key departments, rumors swirl of postponed product rollouts. And with competitors like BYD in China and Stellantis in Europe flooding the market with cheaper, feature-rich alternatives, Tesla is no longer leading the race. It is trying to keep up. Can the company pivot? Possibly. But it will take more than a new model or clever marketing. Tesla needs to rebuild trust, rethink sourcing, and expand production to places less exposed to geopolitical instability. And that window of opportunity is closing fast, because in this trade war, standing still means falling behind. What happens to Tesla will not stay confined to boardrooms or stock tickers. It will ripple out through suppliers, dealerships, tech contractors, and everyday consumers. If Tesla stumbles, it will not fall alone. The entire electric vehicle transition could slow, giving competitors overseas the upper hand. And that is the terrifying irony of this moment. A trade war meant to protect American industry might end up crippling its most iconic innovator. The road ahead for Tesla and for the American auto industry at large is full of potholes. And the world is watching to see who hits them first. But what's your thoughts on this? I want to know. Let's talk in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you there.